All right, in this explainer, we're going to break down a devotional text that uses a really powerful story to make its point about God's will and our obedience. It's a fascinating look at how a dramatic story can be used to teach a deep theological idea. Okay, so let's dive right in. The source material kicks things off with this quote from the book of Isaiah. This one sentence really sets the stage for everything else that's coming. It establishes the main theme right up front, that God's purpose is absolute and it's unchangeable. So first, let's really unpack this foundational idea. The whole argument in this text is built on this belief in the power and, the permanence of God's plan. So the core concept here is that there's a predetermined purpose that governs, everything. The source is basically saying that nothing happens by chance. Instead, it's all part of a master plan, what it calls the counsel of his own will. And to back this idea up, the source points to this verse from Ephesians. It's presented as the scriptural proof, the evidence that our lives and all the events in them are woven into a much larger, divine design. Okay, so that's the big, kind of abstract idea. But to make it more concrete, the source gives us a real-world case study. And it's a pretty dramatic story that takes place in a girls' college over in Benin, Nigeria. And boom, here's where we get the central conflict of the whole story. You've got an authority figure making a direct order that completely goes against the religious beliefs of a bunch of students. The stage is totally set for a major clash of wills. And this just lays out that clash perfectly, doesn't it? On one side, you've got the human decree, a flat-out ban. And on the other, you have the student's conviction, which pushes them to keep practicing their faith in secret, in direct defiance of that rule. Now, as you can probably guess, that kind of secret isn't going to last forever. In this next part of the story, the tension just boils over, and these two opposing forces, they collide head-on. The source gives us this really clear and super tense sequence of events. First, the discovery. Then, the immediate threat of a really severe punishment. And finally, the last resort, an appeal to a higher power. It really feels like the student's fate is just hanging in the balance. And this timeline just highlights how fast everything happens. The threat is made at night, a prayer goes up, and by the very next morning, the big showdown that everyone's expecting at the assembly, it just doesn't happen. The source really builds the suspense around his absence. And here it is, the dramatic climax of the story, just as the devotional tells it. The expected outcome, the girls getting expelled, is completely flipped on its head by this sudden final event. The source presents this as no coincidence, but as a direct act of divine intervention. Wow, so what's the meaning behind such a dramatic story? Well, let's take a look at how the source text itself explains this outcome. It draws a very, very specific lesson from this whole account. The source draws a direct line from the vice principal's fate to this warning from the book of Hebrews. The story is basically framed as a literal example of this exact principle in action, that going against God's will isn't just a bad idea, it's actually perilous. And this is a really crucial point. The source defines opposition as something way more serious than just a simple disagreement. It's presented as an act that puts you in a direct confrontation with divine power, one that could lead to some really severe consequences. So this really sums up the core moral of the story, at least from the source's point of view. The vice principal's fate is meant to be a cautionary tale, illustrating what the text claims is the ultimate end for those who try to fight a divine plan. Okay, so if opposition is presented as being so dangerous, what's the alternative? What are you supposed to do? Well, the final section of the text focuses on giving some very actionable advice to the reader, laying out a clear path to follow. So see, the text doesn't just leave you with a warning, it gives you a clear prescription. It argues that the path to getting divine support and avoiding wrath is through constant obedience, through aligning yourself with what it calls his agenda, and by actively supporting his righteous cause. And this quote just perfectly illustrates the reward for that alignment. By quoting from the Psalms, the source creates this stark contrast between the vice principal's fate and the joy that's promised to those who support God's cause. It sets up a really clear choice: punishment for opposition versus blessing for obedience. At the end of the day, this devotional uses a very stark story to argue for unwavering obedience to a divine plan. And it leaves us with this final, really thought-provoking question. In our complex world, with all its moral and ethical gray areas, how does a person figure out what the source calls a righteous cause? And that's definitely a question worth thinking about.